What? Hi.
Hello, I'm ready to start. Hello. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story. And I haven't mentioned this in a while. If Pat ducks down his head, and you will see this.
Remember we read that story.
And also, we're going to be reading something.
Yes.
Yeah. But we're going to be reading Dragon Song Chapter Mist.
Dragon Singer. And we're going to start off with Daniel, and there's no synopsis today.
Yeah.
So I hope you're okay with that. I see one person on. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, bye.
We appreciate you. We appreciate you. Yes, we do. Gigi, do you remember that song? Okay, anyway. So this is Daniel chapter 9. We're reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible. I see one person on. It's probably mom. So I imagine that we're going to have some other people joining us soon. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started reading. This is, again, Daniel? It is Daniel chapter 9. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, by descent a Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that, according to the word of the Lord, to Jeremiah the prophet, must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Then I turned my face to the Lord God, seeking him by prayer and pleas for mercy with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him, keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. We have sinned and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside from your commandments and rules. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, and to all the people of the land. To you, O Lord, belongs righteousness, but to us open shame, as at this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel, those who are near and those who are far away, in all the lands to which you have driven them, because of the treachery that they have committed against you. To us, O Lord, belongs open shame, to our kings, to our princes, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belong mercy and forgiveness, for we have rebelled against you. And have not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God by walking in his laws, which he set before us by his servants, the prophets. All Israel has transgressed your law and turned aside, refusing to obey your voice. And the curse and oath that are written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out upon us, because we have sinned against him. He has confirmed his words, which he spoke against us and against our rulers who ruled us, by bringing upon us a great calamity. For under the whole heaven there has not been done anything like what has been done against Jerusalem. As it is written in the law of Moses, all this calamity has come upon us, yet we have not entreated the favor of the Lord our God, turning from our iniquities and gaining insight by your truth. Therefore, the Lord has kept us ready or has kept ready the calamity and has brought it upon us. For the Lord our God is righteous in all the works that he has done, and we have not obeyed his voice. And now, O Lord our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand, and have made a name for yourself, as at this day we have sinned, we have done wickedly. O Lord, according to all your righteous acts, let your anger and your wrath turn away from your city Jerusalem, your holy hill, because for our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers, Jerusalem and your people have become a byword among all who are around us. Now, therefore, O our God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to his pleas for mercy. And for your own sake, O Lord, make your face to shine upon your sanctuary, which is desolate. O my God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations and the city that is called by your name. For we do not present our pleas before you because of our righteousness, but because of your great mercy. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, pay attention and act. Delay not for your own sake, O my God, because your city and your people are called by your name. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I have seen in the vision at the first, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, "O Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell it to you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, Prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. That's the end of chapter 9. Lovely. So we've got 1, 2, 3 more chapters in Daniel. And I would just mention right now that the Apocryphal Bible, if you include the Apocrypha, they do have 2 additional chapters in the book of Daniel, which we do not regard those as, is this regarding something that already happened? Some of that is stuff that's already happened. I haven't done a thorough study of this particular chapter, so we will need to do some more of that. I don't want to make a huge conjecture as to exactly what everything is talking about. So I'm considering going ahead and reading Daniel chapters 13 and 14. They are not considered canonical scripture. However, the Catholics still have them in their Bible. I think there's a certain value of reading some of the Apocrypha. So I think that we're going to go ahead and read 13 and 14 when we're done with the book of Daniel, and just recognizing that it isn't part of the canonical Bible that we have today. So with that having been said, Daniel, do you have anything to say before Mom starts reading? No. And I need to get walking because I'm only at 4,300 steps right now. So.
Let the dog out.
Woof, 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 woof.
Covered in dirt.
I didn't do it.
I didn't do it.
All right, here's Mom.
Thanks, y'all. Hey. Oh, hey, can you move this back a little?
Yeah.
My knees are big. Okay. And it's a bad hair day, y'all. Sorry. It's been a day. Okay. Oops. I believe we were on chapter 3. Okay. Dragon Singer by Anne McCaffrey, chapter 3. One of these days, I'm just going to show up in a shower cap with a hair mask on. Okay. I have 3 animals at my feet. I have Twiley, Chrissy, and Easton. And whoever let Chrissy out needs to brush her. Speak softly to my lizard fair, nor raise your hand to me, for they are quick to take offense and quicker to champion me. Did you let them out? Here comes my last animal. Daniel, did you let them out? Yes. Okay. Hey, go settle, please. Mentally wished that Sylvina had stayed long enough to introduce her to Master Geraint, but she guiltily realized how much of the head woman's valuable time she had already had. So, squaring her shoulders against her ridiculous surge of nervousness, mentally entered the square stair hall and saw the door that must lead to the workshop of Master Geraint. She could hear the sounds of workshop industry, hammering, the scrape of saw on wood, toots and thumps, but the instant she opened the door, she and Beauty got the full impact of various noises of tuning, sanding, sawing, pounding, the twanging of tough weir hide being stretched over drum frames and snapping back. Beauty let out a penetrating shriek of complaint and took off, straight for the bracing beams of the high-ceilinged workshop. Her raucous call and her flight suspended all activity in the room, and sudden silence, and then the whispering of the younger workers, all staring at Mentally, attracted the attention of the older man, who was bent almost double, gluing a crucial piece of inlay on the guitar in his lap. He looked up and around at the staring apprentices. Well, what? Beauty gave another cry, launching herself from the rafter beam back to Menelly's shoulder now that the distressing sounds had ceased. Who made that appalling noise? It was animal, not instrumental. Menelly didn't see anyone pointing at her, but suddenly Master Geraint was made aware of her presence by the door. Yes, what are you doing here? And what's that thing on your shoulder? You shouldn't be carrying pets about. Whatever it is, it isn't allowed. Well, lad, speak up. Titters in various parts of the workroom indicated to the man that he was in some error. Please, sir, if you're Master Geraint, I'm Menely. If you're Menely, then you're no lad. No, sir, and I've been expecting you, at least I think so. He peered down and at the inlay he'd been gluing as if accusing the inanimate object of his absent-mindedness. What is that thing on your shoulder? Did it make that noise? Yes, because it was startled, sir. Yes, the noise in here would startle anyone with hearing and wit. Geraint sounded approvingly, and now craned his head forward, withdrawing the instant Beauty gave one of her little chirps, and frowning in surprise that she reacted to his curiosity. So this is one of those mythical fire lizards? He acted skeptical. I named her Beauty, Master Geraint, Menely said, determined to win over other friends for her fire lizards that day. She firmly unwound Beauty's tail from her neck and coaxed her to her forearm. She likes to have her head knobs stroked. Does she? Geraint caressed the glowing golden creature. Beauty closed the inner lid of her brilliant eyes and submitted completely to the master's touch. She does. She's really very friendly. It's just all the noise and so many people. Well, I find her quite friendly, Geraint replied, one long calloused and glue-covered finger stroking the little queen with glowing confidence as Beauty began to hum with pleasure. Very friendly indeed. Are dragon skins as soft as hers? Yes, sir. Charming creature, quite charming, much more practical than dragons. She sings too, said a stocky man sauntering from the back of the hall, wiping his hands on a towel as he came, as if this newcomer released a hidden spring, and a murmurous wave of half giggle, half excited whisperings rippled through the apprentices. The man nodded at Menely. Sings? Asked Geraint, pausing in mid caress, so that Beauty butted her nose at his hand. He continued to stroke the now coyly curved neck. She sings, Dominic? Surely you heard this morning's glorious descant, Geraint. The stocky man was Master Dominic, for whom she must play? True, he wore an old tunic with a faded journeyman's markings, but no journeyman would have addressed a master by his bare name, nor would he be so self-assured. JJ, can you get me some honey and lemon tea? Thank you. This morning's descant? Janet blinked with surprise. I'm having trouble, guys. Sorry. And some of the bolder apprentices chortled at his confusion. Yes, I remember thinking the pitch was a bit unusual for pipes, and besides that, Saga is traditionally sung without accompaniment, and then Brugaden is always improvising. He gave an irritable wave at his hand. Beauty reared up on Menely's arm, startled into fanning her wings for balance and digging her talons, her hind talons, painfully through Menely's thin sleeve. Didn't mean you, you pretty thing, Geraint said by way of apology, and caressed Beauty's head knob until she subsided to her former position. But all that sound from this little creature? How many were actually singing, Menely? Asked Master Dominic. Only 5, she replied reservedly, thinking of Dunca's reaction to the figure 9. Only 5 of them? The droll tone made her glance apprehensively at the stocky master, wondering if he were taunting her, since the half smile on his face gave her no real hint. 5! Master Geraint rocked back on his heels with amazement. You have 5 fire lizards? Actually, sir, to be truthful, it is wiser to be truthful, Menely, agreed Master Dominic, and he was teasing her, not too kindly either. I impressed 9 fire lizards, said Menely in a rush, because, you see, Thread was falling outside the cave, and the only way I could keep the hatchlings from leaving and getting killed by Thread was to feed them, and that impressed them, of course, Dominic finished for her, when she faltered because Master Geraint was wide-eyed with astonishment and incredulity. You will really have to add another verse to your song, Menely, or possibly 2. The Master Harper has edited that song as he feels necessary, Master Dominic, she said with what she hoped was quiet dignity. A slow smile spread across the man's face. It is wiser to be truthful, Menely. Didn't you train all your fire lizards to sing? I didn't actually train them, sir. I played my pipes and they'd sing along. Speaking of pipes, Geraint, this girl has to have an instrument until she can make herself one. Or didn't Petrian have enough wood to teach you, girl? He explained how, Meneley replied. Did Master Domic think Seaholder Giannis would have wasted precious timber for a girl to make a harper's instrument? We'll see in due time how well you absorb that explanation. In the meantime, Meneley needs a guitar to practice or to play for me to practice on. No, sorry. In the meantime, Meneley needs a guitar to play for me and to practice on. Can I have a do-over? Is there a button for that? I'm so... He drawled the last two words, his stern glance sweeping around the room at all the watchers. Everyone was suddenly exceedingly occupied in their interrupted tasks, and the resultant energetic blows, twangs, and whistles made Beauty spread her wings and screech in protest. I can hardly fault her, said Domic as Meneley soothed the fire lizard. What an extraordinary range of sounds she can make, remarked Master Gent. A guitar for Meneley? So we can judge the range of sounds she can make, Domic reminded the man in a bored tone. Yes, yes. There's any number of instruments to choose from, said Geraint, walking with jerky steps towards the courtyard side of the L-shaped room. And indeed there were, Meneley realized as they approached the corner clutter of drums, pipes, harps of several sizes and designs, and guitars. The instruments depended from hooks. It does say depended. The, the instruments depended from hooks set in the stone and cords attached to the ceiling beams, or sat dustily on shelves, the layers of dust increasing as the instruments went beyond easy range. A guitar, you said? Geraint squinted at the assortment and reached for a guitar, its wood bright with new varnish. Not that one. The words were out before Meneley realized how harsh she must sound. Not that one? Geraint's arm still upraised looked at her. Why not? He sounded huffy, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he regarded her. There was nothing in the slightly absent-minded craftsman about Master Geraint now. It's too green to have any tone. How would you know by looking? So, thought Meneley, this is a sort of test for me. I wouldn't choose any instrument on looks, Master Geraint. I'd choose by the sound, but I can see from here that the wood of that guitar is badly joined on the case. The neck is not straight for all it's been veneered prettily. The answer evidently pleased him, for he stepped aside and gestured for her to make her own selection. She picked the strings of one guitar resting against the shelves and absently shook her head, looking further. She saw a case, its weir hide worn but well oiled. Glancing back at the two men for permission, she opened it and lifted out the guitar. Her hands caressed the thin, smooth wood, her fingers curling appreciatively about the neck. She placed it before her, running her fingers down the strings across the opening. Almost reverently she struck a chord, smiling at the mellow sound. Beauty warbled in harmony to the chord and she struck, and then chirped happily. Meneley carefully replaced the guitar. Why do you put it back? Wouldn't you choose it? Asked Geraint sharply. Gladly, sir, but that guitar must belong to a master. It's too good to practice on. Domic let out a burst of laughter and clapped Geraint on the shoulder. No one could have told her that one's yours, Geraint. Go on, girl. Find one just bad enough to practice on, but good enough for you to use. She tried several others, more conscious than ever that she had to choose well. One sounded sweet to her, but the tuning knobs were so worn that the strings would not keep their pitch through a song. She was beginning to wonder if there was a playable instrument in the lot, when she spotted one depending from a hook, almost lost in the shadows of the wall. One string was broken, but when she corded around the missing note, the tone was silky and sweet. She ran her hands around the sound box and was pleased with the feel of the thin wood. The careful hand of its creator had put an intricate pattern of lighter shades of wood around the opening. The tuning knobs were of newer wood than the rest of the guitar, but except for the missing string, it was the best of all but Master Geraint's. I'd like to use this one if I may. She held it towards Geraint. The master nodded slowly, approvingly, ignoring Domic, who gave him a clout on the shoulder. I'll get you a new E string. and Geraint turned to a set of drawers at one end of the shelves, rummaging a moment, and brought out a carefully coiled length of gut. As the string was already looped, she slipped it over the hook, lined it over the bridge, and up the neck into the hole of the tuning knob. She was very conscious of intense scrutiny and tried to keep her hands from trembling. She tuned the new string first to the next one, then to the others, and struck a true chord. The mellowness of the sound reassured her that she had chosen well. Now that you have demonstrated that you can choose well, string and tune, let's see if you can play the guitar of your choice, said Dominic, and taking her by the elbow, steered her from the workroom. She had only time to nod her thanks to Master Geraint as the door slammed behind her. Still gripping her arm and upturned by Beauty's hissing, Dominic propelled her up the stairs and into a rectangular room built over the entrance archway. It must serve a dual purpose as an office and additional schoolroom, to judge by the sand table, the record bins, the wall writing board, and the shelves of stored instruments. There were stools pulled back against the wall, but there were also three leathered couches, the first that Melanie had ever seen, with time darkened armrests and backs, some patched where the original hide had been replaced. Two small windows with folding metal shutters overlooked the broad road to the hold on one side, the courtyard on the other. Play for me, Dominic said, gesturing for her to take a stool as he collapsed into the couch facing the hearth. His tone was expressionless, his manner so noncommittal that Menely felt he didn't expect her to be able to play at all. What little confidence she had gained when she had apparently chosen unexpectedly well ebbed from her. Sorry, got distracted. Unnecessarily, she struck a tuning chord, fiddled with the knob for the new string, trying to decide what to play to prove her competence. For she determined to surprise this Master Dominic, who teased and taunted and didn't like her having 9 fire lizards. Don't sing, Dominic added, and I want no distraction from her. He pointed to Beauty, still on Menely's shoulder. Just that. He jabbed his finger at the guitar and then folded his hands across his lap, waiting. His tone stung Menely's pride awake. With no further thought, she struck the opening chords of the Ballad of Moretta's Ride, and had the satisfaction of seeing his eyebrows lift in surprise. The chording was tricky enough when voices carried the melody, but to pluck the tune as well as the accompaniment increased the difficulty. She did strike several sour chords because her left hand could not quite make the extensions or respond to the rapid shifts of harmony required, but she kept the rhythm keen, and the fingers of her right hand flicked about the melody, loud and true through the strumming. She half expected him to stop her after the first verse and chorus, but as he made no sign, she continued, varying the harmony and substituting an alternative fingering where he left where her left hand had faltered. She had launched into a third repetition when he leaned forward and caught her right wrist. Enough guitar, he said, his expression inscrutable. Then he snapped his fingers at her left hand, which she extended in slow obedience. It ached. He turned it palm up, tracing the thick scar so lightly that the tickling sensation made her spine twitch in reaction through the force, though she forced herself to keep still. Thank you, JJ. He grunted, noticing where her extensions had split the edge of the wound. Old I've seen that hand yet? Yes, sir, and recommended some of his sticky, smelly salves, no doubt. If they work, you'll be able to stretch for the fingerings you missed in the first verse. I hope so. So do I. You're not supposed to take liberties with the teaching ballads and sagas. Wait a minute. Like my mug? It says, I got this for my birthday from Becca. Okay. So Petrion taught me, she replied with an equally expressionless voice. But the minor seventh in the second measure is an alternative chording in the record at half circle C hold. An old variation, Menelly said nothing, but she knew from his very sourness that she had played very well indeed, despite her hand, and that Dominic didn't want to be complimentary. Now, what other instruments did Petrian teach you to play? Drum, of course. Yes, of course. There's a small tambour behind you. She demonstrated the basic drum rolls, and at his request did a more complex drum dance beat, popular with and peculiar to sea holders. Though his expression remained bland, she saw his fingers twitch in time with the beat and was inwardly pleased by that reaction. Next, she played a simple lullaby on the lap harp, well suited to the light, sweet tone of the instrument. He told her he would assume that she could play the great harp, but the octave reaches would place too great a strain on her left hand. He handed her an alto pipe, took a tenor one, and had her play harmony to his melody line. That was fun, and she could have continued indefinitely because it was so stimulating to play duet. Did you have brass at the Sea-Hold? Only the straight horn, but Petrian explained the theory of valves, and he said that I could develop a good lip with more practice. I'm glad to hear he didn't neglect brass. Dominic rose. Well, I can place your instrument standards. Thank you, Menelly. You may be dismissed for the midday meal. With some regret, Menelly reached for the guitar. Should I return this to Master Geraint now? Of course not. His expression was still cool, almost rude. You've got it to practice on, remember, and despite all you know, you will need to practice. Master Dominic, whose was this? She asked the question in a rush, because she had a sudden notion it might be his, which could account for some of his curious antagonism. That one? That was Robinton's journeyman's guitar. Then, with a broad grin at her astonishment, Master Dominic quit the room. Menelly remained, still caught by surprise and dismay at her temerity, holding the now doubly precious guitar against her. Would Master Robinton be annoyed, as Master Dominic seemed to be, that she had chosen his guitar? Common sense reasserted itself. Master Robinson said, or had much finer instruments now, of course, or why else would this journeyman's effort be hidden among Geraint's spares? Then the humor of her choice struck her. Of all the guitars here, she had picked the discarded instrument of the master harper. Small wonder he was harper here if this fine guitar had been made when he was still young. Sorry, guys, it's been really windy here today, and we went out, and there were a couple of times, and there was like every store that we went to had like leaves and dirt and dust all over it, and like I can feel it. Like I felt it in my eyes, and now I feel it like right here. So, okay. Common sense reasserted itself. Master Robinson had much finer instruments now, of course, or why else would his journeyman's effort be hidden among Geraint's spares? Then the humor of her choice struck her. Of all the guitars there, she had picked the discarded instrument of the master harper. Small wonder he was harper here if this fine guitar had been made when he was still young. She strummed lightly, head bent to catch the sweet mellow quality, smiling as she listened to the soft notes die away. Beauty chirped approvingly from her perch on the shelf. Chirpy echoes about the room appraised her that the other fire lizards had sneaked in. They all roused and took wing, squeaking as a loud bell, seemingly right overhead, began to toll. The sharp notes punctuated a pandemonium that erupted from the rooms below and into the courtyard. Apprentices and journeymen, released from their morning classes, spilled into the courtyard, all making the best possible speed to the dining hall, jostling, pushing, and shouting in such an excess of spirits that Menelly gasped in surprise. Why, some of them must be over 20 turns old. No sea-holder would act that way. Boys of 15 turns her age were already serving on boats at the Sea-Hold. Of course, an exhausting day at sail lines and nets left little energy to expend on running or laughing. Perhaps that was why her parents couldn't appreciate her music. It wouldn't appear to be hard work to them. Menelly shook her hands, letting them flap from her wrists. They ached and trembled from the constricted movements and tensions of an hour of intensive playing. No, her parents would never understand that playing musical instruments could be as hard work as sailing or fishing. And she was just as hungry as if she'd been trawling. She hesitated, guitar in hand. She wouldn't have time to take it back to her room in the cottage. No one in the yard seemed to be carrying instruments, so she put the guitar carefully in a vacant spot on a high shelf, told Beauty and the others to remain where they were. She could just imagine what would happen if she brought her fire lizards to the dining hall, as bad as the noise was now. Suddenly the courtyard was empty of hurrying folk. She took the stairs as fast as her feet could go and crossed the courtyard with a fair approximation of her normal swinging stride, hoping to enter the dining room unobtrusively. She reached the wide doorway and halted. The hall seemed overly full of bodies, standing in rigid attention at the long tables. Those facing the windows stood taut with expectation, while those facing the inner wall seemed to be staring hard at the corner on her right. She was about to look when a hissing to her left attracted her. There was Camo, gesturing and grimacing at her to take one of the three vacant seats at the window table. As quickly as possible, she slid in place. Hey, said the small boy next to her without moving his head in her direction. You shouldn't be here. You should be over there with them. He jerked his finger at the long table nearest the hearth. Craning her head to peer past the screening bodies, Mentally saw the sedate row of girls' backs to the hearth. There was an empty seat at one end. No, the boy grabbed at her hand. Not now. Obeying some signal Mentally could see, everyone was seated at that precise moment. Pretty Beauty? Where's Pretty Beauty? Asked a worried voice at her elbow. Beauty not hungry? It was Camo, in each hand a heavy platter piled with roast meat slices. Take it quickly, said the boy beside her, giving her a dig in the ribs. Mentally did so. Well, get yours and pass it, the boy went on. Don't just sit there like a dummy, added the black-haired lad opposite her, frowning fiercely and shifting his buttocks on the hard wood of the bench. Hey, grab, don't gab, ordered another lad, further up the table with considerable irritation at the delay. Mentally mumbled something, and rather than waste time fumbling for her belt knife, she tweaked the topmost slice from the platter to her plate. The boy across from her deftly snagged 4 slices on his knife point and transferred them, dripping juices, to his plate. The boy beside her struggled with the heavy platter, taking 4 slices too, as he passed it on. Should you take so much? She asked, her surprise at such greed overcoming reticence. You don't starve at the Harper Hall, he said, grinning broadly. He sliced the first piece into halves, folded one half over neatly with his blade, and then shoved it into his mouth, catching the juices with his fingers, which he managed to lick despite the mouthful he was busy chewing. His assurance was borne out by the deep bowl of tubers and roots, and the basket of sliced breads, which Camo deposited beside her. From these, Mentally helped herself more liberally, passing the dishes along as quickly as she could. You're Mentally, aren't you? Asked the boy beside her, his mouth still full. Was it really your fire lizard singing this morning? Yes. Whatever lingering embarrassment for that incident Mentally retained was dispersed in the giggle from her table companion and the sly grins of those near enough to overhear the conversation. You should have seen Broodie's face. Broodie? Journeyman Brudigan, to his apprentices, of course. He's choir leader this season. First, he thought it was me pulling a stunt, because I sing high treble. So he stood right beside me. I didn't know what was up, of course. Then he went to Felden and Bonds, and that's when I could hear what was happening. The boy had so engaging a grin that Mentally found herself smiling back. Shells, but Grundy jumped about. He couldn't trace the sound. Then one of the basses pointed out the window. The boy chortled, suppressing the sound when it rose above the general level of table noise. How'd you train him to do that, huh? I didn't know you could get fire lizards to sing. Dragon'll hum, but only when it's hatching time. Can anyone teach a fire lizard to sing? And do you really have 11 all your own? I've only got 9. Only 9, she says. The boy rolled his eyes, encouraging his table mates to second his envious response. I'm Peemer, he added as an afterthought of courtesy. Pimer? Pimer. She shouldn't be here, complained the lad immediately opposite Mentally. He spoke directly to Pimer, as if by ignoring Mentally he could be rude. He was bigger and older looking than Pimer. She belongs over there with them. And he jerked his hand backwards towards the girls at the hearth table. Well, she's here now, and fine where she is, Ranley, said Pimer with unexpected aggressiveness. She couldn't very well change once we were seated, could she? And besides, I heard that she's to be an apprentice, same as you and us, not one of them. Aren't they apprentices? Asked Meneley, inclining her head in the girl's general direction. Them? Pimer's astonished query was as scornful as the look on Ranley's face. No, the drawl in his negative put the girls in an inferior category. They're in the special class with the journeymen, but they're not apprentices. No road. They're a right nuisance, said Ranley with rich contempt. Yeah, they are, said Pimer with a reflective sigh. But if they weren't here, I'd have to sing treble in the plays, and that'd be dire. Hey, Bones, pass the meat back. Suddenly he let out a startled yip. Belden, I asked first. You've no right. A boy had taken the last slice as he handed down the platter. The other boys shushed Pimer vigorously, darting apprehensive glances toward the right corner. But it's not fair. I asked, Pimer said, lowering his voice slightly, but not his insistence. And Meneley only had one slice. She should get more than that. Meneley wasn't certain if Pimer was more outraged on her behalf or his own, but someone nudged her right arm. It was Chemo. Chemo, feed, pretty beauty? Not now, Chemo. They're not hungry now, Meneley assured him because his thick features registered such anxiety. They're not hungry, but she is, Chemo, Pimer said, shoving the meat platter at Chemo. More meat, Chemo. More meat, please, Chemo. More meat, please, Chemo repeated, jerking his head to his chest, and before Meneley could say anything, he had shuffled off to the corner of the dining hall where sliding shelves brought food directly up from the kitchen. The boys were sniggering with the success of Pimer's stratagem, but they wiped their faces clear of amusement when Chemo shuffled back with a well-laden platter. Thank you very much, Chemo, Meneley said, taking another thick slice. She couldn't fault the boys for their greed. The meat was tasty and tender, quite different from the tough or salted stuff she was used to at Half Circle Seahold. Another slab was dumped onto her plate. You don't eat enough, Pimer said, scowling at her. Too bad she'll have to sit with the others, he told his table mates as he passed the platter. Chemo likes her, and her fire lizards. Did he really feed them with you? Asked Ranley. He sounded doubtful and envious. They don't frighten him, Meneley said, amazed at how fast news of everything spread in this place. They wouldn't frighten me, Pimer said. Pimer and Ranley assured her on the same breath. Say, you were at Impression at Bendon Weir, weren't you? Asked Pimer, nudging Ranley to be silent. Did you see Lord Jackson impress the White Dragon? How big is he really? Is he going to live? I was at the Impression. Well, don't go off in a trance, said Ranley. Tell us. All we get is secondhand information. That is, if the masters and journeymen think we apprentices ought to know. He sounded sour and disgusted. Oh, shell it, Ranley, Pimer suggested. So what happened, Meneley? I was in the tiers, and Lord Jackson was sitting below me with an older man and another boy. That'd be Lord Warden Lytall, who's raised him, and the boy was probably Phaleson. He's the son of the Weir leader and Lessa. Oh, I know that, Pimer. Go on, Meneley. Pimer, sorry. Well, all the other dragon eggs had hatched, and there was just the little one left. Jackson suddenly got up and ran along the edge of the tiers, shouting for help. Then he jumped into the hatching ground and started kicking the egg and slashing at the thick membrane inside. The next thing, the little white dragon had fallen out, and Impression, Pimer finished for her, bringing his hands together. Just like I told you, Ranley, you simply have to be in the right place at the right time. Luck. That's all it is, luck. Pimer seemed to be pressing an old argument with his friend. Some people got a lot of luck, some don't. He turned back to Meneley. I heard you were daughter of the sea holder at Half Circle. I'm in the Harper Hall now, aren't I? Pimer stretched out his hands as if that should end the discussion. Meneley turned back to her dinner. Just as she finished mopping the last of the juices on her plate with bread, the shimmering sound of a gong brought instant silence to the hall. A single bench scraped across the stone floor as a journeyman rose from the top oval table to the far end of the hall. Afternoon assignments are, by the sections, Apprentice Hall, 10 yard, 9 hold 8, and no sweeping behind the doors this time or you'll do an extra half duty. Section 7, barns, 6, 5, and 4, fields. 3 is assigned to the hold and 2 and 1 to the cot halls. Those who reported sick this morning are to attend Master Oldive. Players are not to be late this evening, and the call is for the 12th hour. The man sat down to the accompaniment of exaggerated sighs of relief, groans of complaint, and mumbles. I never hear that here. Timer was not pleased. The yard again. Then he turned to Menely. Anyone mention a section number to you? No, Menely replied, although Sylvina had mentioned the term. Not yet, she added as she caught Renly's black stare. Then you have all the luck. The gong broke through the rumble of reaction, and the bench under Menely began to move out from under her. Everyone was rising, so Menely had to rise too. But she stood in place as the others swarmed by, milling to pass through the main entrance, laughing, shoving, complaining. Two boys started gathering plates and mugs, and Menely, at a loss, reached for a plate to have it snatched out of her hand by an indignant lad. Hey, you're not in my section, he said in an accusing tone, tinged with surprise, and went back about his task. Menely jumped at a light touch on her shoulder, stared, and then apologized to the man who had come up beside her. Are you Menely? He asked, a hint of displeasure in his tone. He had such a high-bridged nose that he seemed to have difficulty focusing beyond it. His face was lined with dissatisfaction, and a sallow complexion set off by graying locks tinged with yellow did nothing to alter the general impression he gave of supercilious discontent. Yes, sir, I'm Menely. I am Master Morshaw, craft master in musical theory and composition. Come, girl, I can't hear oneself think in this uproar. And he took her by the arm and began to lead her from the hall, the throng of boys parting before them, as if they felt his presence and wished to avoid any encounter. The Master Harper wants my opinion on your knowledge of musical theory. Menely was given to understand by the tone of his voice that the Master Harper relied on Master Marshall's opinion in this and other far more important matters. And she also gathered the distinct impression that Marshall didn't expect her to know very much. Menely was sorry she had eaten so heartily because the food was beginning to weigh heavily and uneasy in her stomach. Marshall was obviously already predispositioned against her. Psst, Menely! A hoarse whisper attracted her attention to one side. Timer ducked out from behind a taller boy, jerked his thumb upwards in an easily interpreted gesture of encouragement. He rolled his eyes at the oblivious Marshall, grinned impudently, and then popped out of sight in his group. But the gesture heartened her. Funny-looking kid, Pimer was, with his tangle of tight black curls, missing half a front tooth, and by far the smallest of the apprentice lot. How kind of him to reassure her. When Menely realized that Master Harper Marshall must be taking her to the arch room, she sent a mental command to the fire lizards to stay quiet and go find a sunny roof until she called them again. There wasn't so much as a rustle or a chirp when she and Marshall entered. With a resigned attitude, he seated himself on the only backed chair at the sand table. As he didn't indicate that she could seat herself, she remained standing. Now, recite for me the notes in a C major chord, he said. She did so. He regarded her steadily for a moment and blinked. What notes would comprise a major fifth in C? When she had answered that, he began to fire questions at her, irritable if she paused, however briefly, to reply. But Petrian had drilled her too often the same way. Marshall's bored expression was disconcerting, but as his queries became more and more complex, she suddenly realized that he was taking examples from various traditional sagas and ballads. Once he mentioned the signature and which chord, it was simple enough for her to visualize the record hide and recite from memory. Sorry. Suddenly he grunted and then murmured in his throat. Abruptly, he asked her if she'd been taught the drum. When she admitted some knowledge, he asked tedious questions about basic beats in each time factor. How would she vary the beat? Now, as to finger positions on a tenor pipe, what closures did one make for a chord in F? He took her through scales again, and she could have demonstrated more quickly, but he gave her no chance to suggest it. Stand still, girl, he said testily as she shifted her throbbing feet. Shoulders back, feet together, girl, head up. He heard a soft twitter but as he'd been glaring at Meneley, it was obvious she hadn't opened her lips. He glanced about to seek the source as Meneley silently reassured Beauty and urged silence. Don't slouch. What was my question? She told him, and he continued the barrage. The more she answered, the more he asked. Her feet were aching so that she had to ask permission to sit, if only briefly. But to her amazement, before she could, Marshall abruptly stabbed a finger at the stool next to him. She hesitated, not quite believing the gesture. Sit, 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 he said in excess of irritation at her delay. Now let's see if you know anything about writing down what you've been repeating so glibly. She'd been answering correctly, and he was annoyed because she knew so much. Her flagged spirits lifted. As Master Marshall dictated musical notations, her fingers drove the pointer quickly over the sands. In her mind, a different kind of voice dictated, and the exercise became a game rather than an examination by a prejudiced judge. Well, move back so I can see what you've written, Marshall's testily voice recalled her to the present. He peered at her inscriptions, pursed his lips, humped, and sat back. He gestured prematurely for her to smooth the sand surface and rapidly gave her another set of chords. They included some difficult modulations and time values, but after the first two, she recognized the riddle song and was very glad Petrion had made her learn the haunting tune. That's enough of that, Master Marshall said, drawing his overtunic about him with quick, angry motions. Now, have you an instrument? Yes, sir. Then get it and that third score from the top shelf over there. Be quick about it. Mentally hissed to herself as she stepped on her throbbing feet. Sitting had not relieved the swelling, and her feet felt thick at the ankles and stiff. Hurry up, girl. Don't waste my time. Beauty gave a soft hiss, too, from her perch on the top shelf, unlidding her eyes, and from the rustling sounds in the same general area, Mentally knew the other fire lizards had roused. With her back to Master Marshall, she gestured Beauty to close her eyes and be quiet. She cringed at the thought of Master Marshall's probable reaction to fire lizards. I said, hurry, girl. She shuffled to the place where she had laid the guitar and hurried back with instrument and music. The master took the hides, his lips twitching with annoyance as he turned the thick leaves. This was new copying, Memily saw, for the hide was almost white and the notes clear and easily read. The hide edges were neatly trimmed, too, the lines going from margin to margin, to be sure, but no notes lost in decayed edges. There, play me that. The music was slid across the sand table with Mentally thought, somewhat shocked, complete disregard for the value of the work. By some freak of chance, Master Marshall had chosen the ballad of Moretta's Ride. She'd never managed the verse chords as written, and he'd fault her if she couldn't. Sir, she began, holding out her left hand. I want no excuses. Either you can play it as written, or I assume that you are unable to perform a traditional work up to a credible standard. Mentally ran her fingers across the strings to see if the tuning had held. Come, come, if you can read written scores, you can play them. That was assuming a lot, Mentally thought to herself, but she struck the open chords, and mindful that she was undoubtedly waiting for her to falter, she played the so well-known ballad according to the score before her, rather than by rote. There were variations in the chords, two of which were easily managed, but she flubbed the fourth and fifth because her scarred hand would not stretch. I see, he said, waving her to stop. But he looked oddly pleased. You cannot play accurately at tempo. Very well, that is all. You are dismissed. I beg your pardon, Master Marshall, mentally began again, extending her hand as explanation. You what? He glared at her, and his eyes wide with incredulity as she seemed to be defying him. Out! I just dismissed you. What is this world coming to when girls presume to be harpers and pretend to compose music? Out! Great shells and stars. His voice changed from scold to panic. What's that? What are they? Who let them in here? Already making her way down the steps, Mentally lost her anger with him at the fright in his voice. His anger had roused her friends, and since she was apparently in danger, they had rushed to protect her by squeaking and diving at him. She laughed as she heard the slamming of a heavy door and as instantly regretted the scene. Master Marshall would be against her, and that would not make her life easy in the Harper Hall. Nothing to fear from Harpers. Was that what Tegelen had said last night? Maybe not fear, but certainly she was going to have to be cautious with them. Perhaps she ought not to have been so knowledgeable about music. What had irritated him? But wasn't that knowledge what he was testing? Once again, she wondered if there really was a place for her here. Presumed to be a harper? No, she hadn't, and it was up to Master Robinson, wasn't it? Were Master Marshall and Master Dominic part of the conventional procedures for Master Robinson had mentioned? Even if she needn't have much to do with them, she sensed their antagonism and dislike. She sighed and turned on the landing for the second flight and stopped. Pimer was in the hall, motionless, his eyes enormous, as he followed the excited flitting of the fire lizards. Lazy and Uncle had subsided to the banister. I'm not seeing things? He asked her, watching Lazy and Uncle with an apprehensive glare. From the hand held rigid at his side, the forefinger indicated the two fire lizards. No, you're not. The brown one is Lazy and the blue is Uncle. His eyes followed the flight of the others a moment longer, trying to count. Then he popped out further as Beauty landed daintily on Menelly's shoulder in her usual position. This is Beauty, the queen. Yes, she is, isn't she? Pimer kept staring as Menelly descended to the floor level. Beauty stretched her neck, her eyes whirling gently as she returned his look. Suddenly she blinked her eyes, and so did Pimer, which made Menelly giggle. No wonder Chemo was cracking his shell over her. Then Pimer shook himself all over like a fire lizard shedding seawater. I was sent to bring you to Master Shonagar. Who's he? Asked Menelly, weary enough from the session with Master Marshall. Old Marshface gave you a hard time. Don't worry about it. You'll like Master Shonagar. He's my master. He's the voice master. He's the best. Pimer's face lit up with real enthusiasm, and he said that if you can sing half as well as your fire lizards do, you're an asset. Asset? It amused Menelly to be so considered by anyone. That's the word. And he said that it didn't really matter if you croaked like a watchware, so long as you could get the fire lizards to sing. Do you think she likes me? He added, for he hadn't stopped staring at Beauty. Not that he, nor had he moved. Why not? She keeps staring at me so, and her eyes are whirling. He gestured absently with one hand. You're staring at her. Pimer blinked again and looked at Menelly, smiling shyly and giggling a bit self-consciously. Yeah, I was, wasn't I? Sorry about that, Beauty. I know it's rude, but I've always wanted to see a fire lizard. Hey, Menelly, come on. And now Pimer moved off at a half run, gesturing urgently for Menelly to follow him across the courtyard. Master Shonagar's waiting, and I know you're new here, but you don't ever keep a master waiting. And say, can you keep them from following us? Because they might sing. And Master Shonagar did say it was you he wanted to hear sing today, not them again. They'll be quiet if I ask them to. Ranley, he sat across the table from you. He's from Crom, and he's so smart he says they only mimic. Oh, no, they don't. Glad to hear that, because I told him they're just as smart as dragons, and he wouldn't believe me. Pimer had been leading her towards the big hall where the chorus had been practicing that morning. Hurry up, Menelly. Masters hate to be kept waiting, and I've been gone a while tracking you down. I can't walk fast, Menelly said, gritting her teeth at the pain of each step. You sure are walking funny. What's the matter with your feet? Menelly wondered if he hadn't heard that tidbit of news. I got caught away from the cave just as Threadfall, and I had to run for safety. Pimer's eyes threatened to bulge out of their sockets. You ran? His voice squeaked. Ahead of Thread? I ran my shoes off my feet and the skin as well. Menelly had no chance to speak further because Pimer had brought her to the hall door. Before she could adjust her eyes to the darkness within the huge room, she was told not to gawk, but come forward at a proper pace. He detested dawdling. With respect, sir, Menelly's feet were injured outrunning Thread, said Pimer, just as if he'd always been in possession of this truth. She's not the dawdling kind. Now Menelly could see the barrel-shaped figure seated at the massive sand table opposite the entrance. Proceed at your own pace, then, for surely a girl who outruns Thread has learned not to dawdle. The voice flowed out of the darkness, rich round, with the R's rolled and the vowel sounds pure and ringing. The other fire lizards swooped in through the open door, and the master's eyes widened slightly. He regarded Menelly in mock surprise. Pimer! The single word stopped the boy in his tracks, and the volume, which startled Menely, caused Pimer to flick her a grin. Did you not convey my message accurately? The creatures were not to come. They follow her everywhere, Master Shonagar, only she says they'll be quiet if she tells them to. Master Shonagar turned his heavy head to regard Menely with hooded eyes. So tell them. Menely detached Beauty from her shoulder and ordered them all to perch themselves quietly, and not to make a single sound until she said they could. Well, remarked Master Shonagar, turning his head slightly to observe the obedience of the fire lizards, that's a welcome sight, sure, surrounded as I generally am by mass disobedience. He glared narrowly at Pimer, who had the temerity to giggle, and at Master Shonagar's stare, tried to assume a sober expression. I've had enough of your bold face, Pimer, and your dilatory manner. Take them away. Yes, sir, said Pimer cheerfully, and twisted about on his heels. He marched himself smartly to the door, pausing to give Menely an encouraging wave as he skipped down the steps. Rascal, said the master in a mock growl as he flicked his fingers at Menely to take the stool opposite him. I'm given to believe that Petrian ended his days as harper at your hold, Menely. She nodded, tacitly reassured by his unexpected willingness to address her by name. And he taught you to play instruments and to understand musical theory? Menely nodded again, in which Masters Domic and Marshall have examined you today. Some dryness in his tone alerted her, and she regarded him more warily as he tilted his heavy head sideways on his massive shoulders. And did Petrian, and now the bass voice rolled with a hint of coming displeasure, so that Menely wondered if her original assessment of this man was wrong, and he was just as prejudiced and as cynical Domic and sour Marshall. Did he have the audacity to teach you how to use your voice? No, sir. At least I don't think he did. We just sang together. Ha! And the huge hand of Master Shonagar came down forcefully on the sand table that the drier portions jumped in their frames. You just sang together, as you sang together with those fire lizards of yours? Her friends chirped inquiringly. Silence! He cried, with another sand-displacing thump on the table. Somewhat to Menely's surprise, because Master Shonagar had startled her again, the fire lizards flipped their wings to their backs and settled down. Well, did I just sing with them? Yes, I did. As you used to sing with Petrian? Well, I used to sing descant to Petrian's melody, and the fire lizards usually do the descant now. That was not precisely what I meant. Now, I wish you just to sing for me. What, sir? She asked, reaching for the guitar slung across her back. No, not with that, and he waved at her impatiently. Sing, not countersides. The voice only is important now, not how you mask vocal inadequacies with pleasant strumming and clever harmony. I want to hear the voice. It is the voice we communicate with, the voice which utters the words we seek to impress on men's minds, the voice which evokes emotional response, tears, laughter, sense. Your voice is the most important, most complex, most amazing instrument of all. And if you cannot use that voice properly, effectively, you might just as well go back to whatever insignificant hold you came from. Menely had been so fascinated by the richness and variety of the master's tones that she didn't really pay heed to the content. Well, he demanded. She blinked at him, drawing in her breath, belatedly aware that he was waiting for her to sing. No, not like that, dolt. You breathe from here, and his fingers spread across his barrel-width midsection, pressing it so that the sound from his mouth reflected that pressure. Through the nose, so, and he inhaled, his massive chest barely rising as it was filled, down the windpipe, and he spoke in a single musical note to the belly, and the voice dropped an octave. You breathe from your belly if you breathe properly. She took the breath as suggested and then expelled it because she didn't know what to sing with all that breath. For the sake of the hold that protects us. And he raised his eyes and hands aloft as if he could grasp patience from the air. The girl simply sits there. Sing, Menely, sing. Menely was quite willing to, but she had so much to say before she could start or think of what to sing. She took another quick breath, felt uncomfortable, seated, and without asking, stood and launched into the same song that the apprentices had been singing that morning. She had a brief notion of showing him that he wasn't the only one who could fill the hall with resounding tones, but some fragment of advice from Petrian came to mind, and she concentrated on singing intensely rather than loudly. He just looked at her. She held the last note, letting it die away as if the singer were moving off, and then she sank down onto the stool. She was trembling, and now that she'd stopped singing, her feet began to throb in a dull beat. Master Shanagar only sat there, great folds of chin billowing down his chest. Without lifting his head, he tilted his body backwards and stared at her from under his fleshy and black-haired brows. And you say that Petria never taught you to use your voice? Not the way you did, said, and Meneley pressed her hands demonstratively against her flat belly. He told me always to sing with my gut and heart. I can sing louder, she added, wondering if that's why Shanagar was frowning. He waggled his fingers. Any idiot can bellow, Camo can bellow, but he can't sing. Petrian used to say, if you sing loud, they only hear noise, not sound or song. Ha! He told you that? My words exactly. So he did listen to me after all. The last was delivered in an undertone to himself. Petrian was wise enough to know his limitations. Silently, mentally bridled at the aspersion. From the window ledge, Beauty hissed, and Rocky and Diver echoed her sentiment. Master Shanagar raised his head and regarded them in mild perplexity. So, and he fixed his deep eyes on her, what the mistress feels, the pretty creatures echo. And you loved Petrian and will hear no ill word against him. He leaned forward slightly, waggling a forefinger at her. Know this, Meneley, who runs. We all have limitations, and wise is he who recognizes them. I meant, and he settled back into his chair, no disrespect for the departed Petrian. For me, that was praise. He tilted his head again. For you, the best thing possible, for Petrian had sense enough not to meddle, but to wait until I could attend to your vocal education. Temper and refine what is natural, and produce. Now, Master Shanagar's left eyebrow was jerking up and down, the one arching while the other remained unmoved, so that Meneley was fascinated by his control. Produce a well-balanced, proper singing voice, the master exhaled hugely. Then Meneley took in the sense of what he'd been saying, no longer distracted by his facial contortions. You mean I can sing? Any idiot on Pern can sing, the master said disparagingly. No more talk, I'm weary. He began brushing her away from him. Take those other sweet-throated freaks along with you, too. I've had enough of their baleful looks and assorted noises. I'll see that they stay. Stay away? No, Shanagar's eyebrows rose sharply. Bring them. They learn from example, one assumes, so you will set them a good example. A distant look clouded his eyes, or his face, and then a slow smile tugged up the corners of his mouth. Go, Meneley, go now. All this has wearied me beyond belief. With that, he leaned his elbow on the sand table so heavily that the opposite end left the floor. He cushioned his head against his fist, and while Meneley watched bemused, began to snore. Although she didn't think any human could fall asleep so quickly, she obeyed the implicit dismissal and, beckoning to her fire lizards, quietly departed. Okay, that was an extremely long chapter, chapter 3. We'll do chapter 4 tomorrow. Hopefully. And we are at an hour and 8 minutes. Chapter 4, the first word is Harper. No, my throat hurts. And I'm going to go to bed early tonight. Let's see. We have comments. Does this mouse work? Mom. Let me say hi to Twilight, please. Okay. At the end, Kimmy. Okay. Fine. Twilight! Heart you, Mommy and Daddy. Twilight. I don't know where she is. I think she might be in Kimmy's room. She's opened the can of cat food. She'll come. I'm gonna talk to them and I'll look for her. There she is.